hell? Is it eternal torment or temporary torment and judgment and then eternal destruction? When reading the Bible and see over and over again that it uses words like destruction or perishing to describe what happens when people are cut off from God, which makes sense because God is life and you can't be sustained by God, who is the eternal life, if you're cut off from him. We're made in his image, so when we cut off cancer from us, it can stay alive temporarily, but eventually it ceases to exist. And that's the way I think about sin and death. And it says that death and Hades will be thrown into the lake and fire, and that is the second death. And that don't fear those who destroy the body, but fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. And I know there are some verses that is a little harder to deal with, and I wanted to go over two of those verses. The first verse that I want to talk about is Matthew 25:41. It says, "He shall then also say to those on the left hand, Go away from me, accursed ones, into the everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels." In Jude 1, we see that when Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed, that it uses the term everlasting fire. In Jude 1:7 it says, "Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in a similar way to these, having given themselves over to whoring and gone after strange flesh, are set forth as an example, undergoing judicial punishment of everlasting fire." Sodom and Gomorrah are not still around, burning with fire. So obviously this everlasting fire isn't saying everlasting torment. I think it's what it's pointing out is it's using everlasting fire. Like, it is a permanent destruction that is not going to be undone. It's not like he's just punishing them and then letting them live. No, it's everlasting fire is an everlasting destruction. So everlasting fire, everlasting destruction. Sodom and Gomorrah are not still being burned with fire today. We often see hyperbolic, symbolic, and poetry style of language in the Bible. An example of this is when Jesus tells them that if their eye causes them to stumble, gouge it out. So we know that he's not saying literally gouge out your eyes, but he's saying to cut off the things that cause you to sin. An example today could be when a football team defeats the other team and they say something like, "Oh yeah, we slaughtered them." Now, people were reading back on that text would be like, "What?" But they use different languages like that type of language throughout the world and throughout history. It's nothing new to use hyperbolic, symbolic, or poetry style of language, and we do see that in the Bible. Also, God's fire that he's using to destroy people might not even necessarily mean a literal fire, but it could just be referring to God's wrath. I think Isaiah 42:25 is a good example of this. It reads, "So he poured out on him the heat of his anger and the fierceness of battle, and it set him aflame all around. Yet he did not recognize it, and it burned him, but he paid no attention." Didn't even realize he was on fire? Yeah, it's not a literal fire in this verse. And so it makes sense that it might not be in other verses a literal fire, as hell or being cut off from God can also be referred to as being thrown into the outer darkness. The next verse that I know is a big one is Revelation 14:11, where it says, "The smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest day or night." So I believe this is likely hyperbolic language, as we see the same language, very similar language, spoken about the destruction of Edom in Isaiah 34:8-17. Also, if there's no rest day or night, this can't be referring to eternal torment, because it also says in Revelation that there will be no more night. In the context surrounding the verse, we see that the Lamb and the angels are watching them being tormented. And this seems to contradict other verses because it says that the former matters have passed away and there will be no more suffering. I do believe that the verse in Revelation 14:11 is most likely hyperbolic language, and that the smoke ascending endlessly is an exaggeration to highlight the permanent destruction, that it's not going to be changed. Because we do see examples where God would change his mind, his judgment on Israel in the Old Testament. But the fact that he's using these types of terms, the smoke ascending endlessly, it is a permanent destruction, is what it seems to be highlighting, not a permanent torment, which would contradict the rest of the Bible. God truly is eternal life, and Jesus is the bread of life, and we not only are given life by him, but our life is sustained by him. So if that's all true, then that would mean that God would have to sustain the lives of unbelievers and the wicked for eternity just to torture them. Also, it is a finite crime So justice, we know logically a finite crime deserves a finite punishment. Not a finite crime deserves a eternal torment. It is an eternal destruction because God's not going to force people to be with him that don't want to be with him. But once they're gone for good. That's the eternal part. It cannot be undone. Permanent destruction. I do have another theory on what this verse could potentially mean, and I have a whole video going deeply over the topic of hell and the depths of these verses that people claim means eternal conscious torment. So check that out if that's something you're interested in.